Okay, so today we talk about coming out of Unit 2 and Unit 3. We start talking about populations, population growth. We talk about these graphs in terms of S-shaped curves, that kind of stuff, limiting factors, all that kind of stuff. Now, moving into evolution, a lot of that stuff is going to be very important for understanding the driving forces behind evolution. Let's start with this guy right here. So you take a look at this little guy here, kind of a nondescript organism here, kind of 3 legs, 4 legs, I think, when he moves. In this case, it's just a frozen picture. But so he's got some legs there, whatever. It could be anything. Could be the land version of an octopus or something like that. If I were to take him and I were to give him the opportunity to live in any habitat. Now again, think about Unit 2 and Unit 3. Where would I put this guy? If this guy were saying I could choose any habitat to live in, would I put him here, here, here? Where would I put this guy and why? Give me some idea.
Yellow habitat.
Yellow? Why?
If he's the same color, so he can camouflage.
So he can camouflage. What would be the advantage of him being able to camouflage?
If he's a prey, then he can hide from predators.
Okay, and if he's a
Predator, he can sneak up on prey.
okay, if he's a predator, he can sneak up on prey. So either way, that would work out for him, right? Now, there may be some other things that we don't know about this organism, but at the same time, based on what we do know, which is very little, we would think that the best place for him to live, or her, to live, maybe it's asexual, to live, is in this yellow environment. Because of camouflage purposes, whether it be as a prey to hide from the predator, or whether it be a predator to hide from the prey as it sneaks up on it. What?
I think you should put him in the blue one because he'd look better in blue.
He would look better in blue? He would look better in blue, except he'd be starving because he wouldn't be able to sneak up. But yes, if it brings out his eyes. Yes, I agree. Okay, so it does. It brings out his eyes. So, what's that?
His eyes are unaligned.
No. Now, so we answered the question, where should he live? We talked a little bit about why. Now, I'm sure this isn't going to work because this links to something on the internet, but let's see if it happens to come up. We'll give it a try. Maybe the hard line is working better. I doubt it. This makes this transition a little bit harder when I do this. Well, let me describe to you what it was supposed to be, and then maybe you can get the sense of how this transition was supposed to work. This little guy is one in a population, okay? Now, I told you that we can live in these different environments. So yellow, blue, green, that kind of stuff. And also his brothers and sisters are of varying colors as well. Blue, green, and stuff like that. Now, if I were to change the environment, you'll see that certain things are selected for or against based on the color of their surroundings. And yet they're all the same species. They just have different variations of that same species. And therefore, the certain colors are selected for. Okay? And that's going to lead us into the conversation, or should lead us into the conversation, of not necessarily what is going on as far as the change, because we can see that there's a good reason. There's a change in species over time. So the question isn't whether evolution happens or not. Evolution is the change in species over time. Simple, straightforward definition. But the real question isn't what happens, but how does it happen? What is the mechanism by which that change occurs? How does it happen over a period of time? And that's really what our question is for today. What is evolution? Easy. Change over time. I can't spend any more time than saying that one more time. Change over time. It's not a new idea. It wasn't a new idea back when Darwin proposed the concept of natural selection. But what was unique is that he was the first one to really come up with a workable, or one that we can support today, idea of what drives evolution. So, we always start out our conversation of evolution with this guy right here. We talk about him in middle school, right? Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. We talk about him in middle school. Anybody remember him? Raise your hand if you remember him from middle school. Nobody? You don't talk about him at all?
might have
I see
mentioned him a
some.
few times.
Maybe. There's a good chance that you did, and you don't remember, maybe?
Yeah.
No, I don't know. Maybe you didn't. He's honestly not that important in terms of the understanding of evolution. But what he is important is he's important to understand the mindset. And that's usually why we start with him. It's funny because, somebody like Aristotle, everybody knows who Aristotle is, right? At least you have a basic concept of who Aristotle was, okay?
Oh, stars.
He is the most famous person in the entire world who pretty much got everything he ever said wrong, okay? But the fact is, why we talk about him so often is he was the first one willing to say a lot of those things. He was the first one to think about the underlying, aspect to many of these concepts that we're talking about. And that's kind of how we talk about him, or why we talk about him, is because he was the first one to go out on a limb and say, here's a reason, or here's how evolution could work. Okay? He's not the first one to propose the idea of evolution, change over time. Actually, the first people to propose the concept of evolution were geologists. Why do you think geologists were kind of the first ones to propose the concept of evolution? Sid?
They excavate and find bones and skeletons of animals that are similar to, but are different in some way to animals that are in the modern day.
Good. Excellent. Yep. And they would see this in the fossil record. They would see organisms very similar to ones we have today that were slightly different. And it stands to reason that those things changed over time. So evolution. Now the question is, though, that most of us were guided, okay, at least most of, the Europe and stuff like that, were guided by the Church of England. That means the book of Genesis, right? Creation. It happened as a single event, okay, and everything, species were put on this planet the way that they are changing, they just stay the same all the time. That's basically the concept. And that wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't just people's religious belief, it was their whole entire value system was based on that. So to go against that was a huge problem, or a huge deal at that time frame. Okay, because that was their whole lives. Today, I would consider myself, and again, not to get into too much detail, but I would consider myself a religious person. But at the same time, I don't think my entire life is focused on that one thing. You know what I mean? I don't think I necessarily always use my politics don't revolve around that. Okay, it's just a portion of my life. Whereas at the time, this was people's lives. Okay, it's a big difference. Anyway, so we talk about him because he was the first one to really come up with what we call a mechanism for evolution. How evolution could potentially work. So the first thing he proposed was this concept of use and disuse. Basically what he said is that organisms that use a particular structure develop that structure over a period of time, and it becomes more and more developed. And then individuals who don't use a particular characteristic, that becomes smaller and smaller till eventually it disappears altogether. So this concept of use and disuse. The idea is on your person right now, your pinky toe will eventually disappear. And that's one of the reasons why it's the smallest toe on your foot, is because you don't use it very much. Okay, we're not swinging from trees anymore, okay? If you had no pinky toe, I don't think you'd have too much issue in life. Okay? So, except Lauren, apparently. Yes?
It would make your walking weird if you usually walk without.
I have no pinky toe. Do you know that?
Really?
No, I'm lying. But I'm just saying, you probably would have no idea if someone didn't have a pinky toe. So, well, I do have a web toe, though. Who'd you hear that from?
But it was from the beginning of school.
I said it?
Yeah.
Was it my thing that I threw at somebody?
Yeah.
Oh, was it? Okay. I was like, where'd you hear that? I do have a web toe. So, anyway, that's beside the point. So, only in circles, because it's only on one foot. You don't remember that joke at the beginning of the year? I'm sure I told that joke at the beginning of the year. Half fish. So I'm merman. All right. Anyway, use and disuse. He saw this happening around the village. He'd walk downtown and he'd see out there he'd see the blacksmith hammering away on his anvil and making horseshoes and things like that. And he's got huge muscles, okay, because he uses them all the time. So he saw that as support for his concept of use, okay? And then he'd go down to the next shop and he'd see the cobbler, okay? Not apple cobbler, but the cobbler who, fixes shoes and stuff like that. He would see him and he wouldn't have those big, huge developed muscles, But instead, he'd be really adept at using his fingers and hands and stuff like that to fix shoes and leather working and stuff like that. So he would see this. And not only would he see this, but then I'm going to kind of jump over this middle one for a second and jump down to this one. He would say not only did these people develop these particular traits, but then they passed them on to their offspring. So, therefore, usually not only is the blacksmith huge and ripped and everything like that, but his son is also huge and ripped and stuff like that and becomes a blacksmith as well. Because he used those things and passed that concept on, or passed that trait on to his offspring. So that was the concept behind both the concept of use and disuse, as well as acquiring characteristics. Now the concept of acquiring characteristics, when I put it in certain contexts, sounds ridiculous. For example, okay, if I were to say, over here Amali dyes his hair red, okay, and then he goes and he has children, are his children going to have red hair?
No.
Okay, so the answer is no, they're not going to be born with red hair. Unlikely anyway, they could. I didn't think my kids were going to be born with red hair, but they were.
What was his opinion on brain evolution? Like, if a mathematician had children, would his children be naturally good at math?
Yes, I mean he would, and he would attribute that to the use of the brain as opposed to a genetic predisposition for being smart. Okay, that's how he would have attributed it. So I don't know that he specifically gave that much thought, specifically, about mathematicians and stuff like that, but yes, that was how he would explain it, okay? Okay, let's come over here. Let's say I come over here and I chop off his arm. Okay, now are his children going to be born with one arm?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No, that's not going to happen, okay? We know that's not going to happen, okay, because that happened during his lifetime. It's an acquired characteristic. Those are not inherited. There have been experiments done. For example, they've taken mice and they've chopped off their tails. Then they've let those mice reproduce and have children. And then they measured their children's tails. And then they chopped off their tails and let them reproduce. And then they chopped off their tails and they let them reproduce. For generation upon generation, for 20 generations. And not only was every successive generation born with tails, but the average tail length didn't change. So it's not even like they were getting smaller every time I chopped them off. Okay? They stayed the same size generation upon generation for 20, 30, 40, 50 generations. So to get rid of this concept that acquired characteristics are inherited. Now, I'm telling you, this concept of use and disuse and this concept of acquired characteristics are not true. However, I want to tell you something else. There is a population, a tribe in Africa, who finds long necks to be desirable. Okay? So what happens is at a certain point in time, a certain age, okay, what happens is the women start putting these rings underneath, right against their collarbones, right up underneath to their jawbones. So they stick as many rings as they possibly can fit right up under there. And then every so often they insert another ring to stretch that neck a little bit further, and stretch it a little bit further, and stretch it a little bit further. Now, Lamarck would have said that as they stretched out their necks, when they had children, their children would have longer necks, right? That's what he would have said. And guess what? They do. On average, the baby born to this particular tribe or this particular population has a longer neck than anywhere else in the entire world, than any other population in the entire world. But I just told you that this is not true. So how would you explain that? Now just wait, don't actually explain it yet. Just keep that concept, or think about that for a little bit. Okay, think about that concept for a little bit, sit on it for a minute, think about that. At first glance, I have data that supports Lamarck's concept. I have it right here. See it? Okay. What, question?
When was the data taken of the offspring?
What do you mean, when was it?
Like as a baby or like
As soon as they were born. Yeah. So again, if they were to measure their necks at birth versus the necks of any other population in the world at birth, the average size of the necks of those populations, that tribe, were longer than anywhere else in the world. So again, at first glance, I have data to support it. Okay, so leave it at that. So that's the concept of use and disuse and acquired characteristics. A lot of times you'll see this discussed in terms of giraffes, right? Giraffes originally had short necks. But what happened after a period of time, they had to reach further and further for their food, up into trees. And that by stretching their necks, they got longer necks and they passed that on to their offspring, and the offspring had longer and longer necks over a period of time, eventually resulting in giraffes as we know them today. Okay, so that's what you see in terms of the concept. Now, Lamarck really never talked about giraffes. It's just a common example that you see used. All right. The other one is this one right here. Organisms want to adapt to their environment. So because organisms want to be better suited for their environment, they actually physically strive and desire to be better for their environment, and therefore they become better adapted because they want it. If I want something bad enough, it'll happen, right? Do you ever hear that? It's like that,
Yeah.
go get them type of attitude, right? If I want it bad enough, I can just go out and get it. The same thing here. Organisms want to be better suited for their environment, so they become better suited for their environment because they want it bad enough. All right, and it sounds ridiculous, but here's a silly cartoon that goes